wildest, weirdest, and most unforgettable stories from Hollywood's past. Today, we're diving headfirst into the sword and sorcery craze of the 80s with 10 R-rated Conan knockoffs that went completely off the rails. From outrageous battles to magic, mayhem, and outfits you won't believe existed, these films took fantasy to the extreme and sometimes completely lost it. If you haven't subscribed to Globewise Entertainment yet, hit that subscribe button now so you never miss a deep dive into cinema's most outrageous moments. And before we jump in, tell us in the comment box, which over-the-top fantasy movie from the 80s is your guilty pleasure? 12. Sorceress, 1982. When sword and sorcery took a bizarre detour. If you thought the sword and sorcery craze of the early 80s couldn't get any weirder than Conan the Barbarian, then Sorceress, 1982, was here to prove you wrong. This low-budget flick tried to capture the muscular heroics, epic magic, and steamy adult themes of its blockbuster predecessors, but it ended up careening into bizarre territory faster than a dragon on steroids. The plot? A stolen magical crystal, a pair of rival sorcerers, and a scantily clad warrior woman on a quest for vengeance. Yes, it checks all the boxes, but somehow the storytelling feels like a fever dream. The film leaned heavily on R-rated nudity and gratuitous violence, often overshadowing the actual swordplay or magic, leaving audiences scratching their heads and reaching for the popcorn. Special effects were charmingly amateurish. From wobbly monsters to magic spells that look like someone threw glitter in slow motion, Sorceress fully embraces the "so bad it's almost good" vibe. Despite, or maybe because of, its chaotic execution, the movie developed a cult following among fans of over-the-top fantasy misfires. If you're hunting for a Conan clone that forgot the hero part and cranked the adult content up to 11, Sorceress is your guilty pleasure. Think of it as the wild, untamed cousin of Conan the Barbarian, a cautionary tale of what happens when ambition meets zero budget and too many R-rated ideas. 11. Barbarian Queen, 1985. If you thought the 80s had enough sword-swinging heroes, Barbarian Queen took it to an entirely different and eyebrow-raising level. This film wasn't just a Conan knockoff, it was a full-on, no-holds-barred exploitation fantasy that leaned hard into nudity and shock value. The story follows Queen Aemthea, a fierce warrior princess whose kingdom is brutally overthrown. What follows is a chaotic quest for revenge filled with campy dialogue, improbable sword fights, and yes, plenty of risque scenes that made even hardcore fantasy fans do a double take. What makes Barbarian Queen so infamous isn't just its over-the-top action. It's the audacious mix of feminist fantasy and pure titillation. Think of it as a mashup of Conan's muscle-bound heroics with a grindhouse twist that screams, "What were they thinking?" From the ridiculous villains to the jaw-dropping scenes of peril, it's the kind of B-movie chaos that has earned a cult following over decades. For monetization purposes, this movie is a goldmine. It's controversial, shareable, and guarantees clicks from viewers curious about the wildest R-rated fantasies of the 80s. Clips of Aemthea wielding her sword against impossible odds, coupled with humorous commentary, are exactly the content that keeps audiences glued and the ads rolling. In short, Barbarian Queen isn't just a Conan knockoff, it's a flamboyant time capsule of 80s excess, proving that when filmmakers go off the rails, sometimes they create cinematic chaos that you can't look away from. 10. Deathstalker, 1983. If you thought swords and sorcery in the 80s couldn't get any wilder than Conan the Barbarian, Deathstalker is here to prove you wrong, by taking everything that worked in Conan and turning it up to 11, and then dropping it down a cliff. This cult classic is pure B-movie chaos, a low-budget fantasy epic filled with exaggerated muscle-bound heroes, impossibly scantily clad villains, and a plot that's barely holding itself together. Deathstalker follows the titular rogue warrior as he embarks on a quest to recover a mystical artifact, encountering a parade of evil sorcerers, treacherous seductresses, and monster-filled dungeons along the way. But what really makes this film unforgettable is its willingness to embrace absurdity. Every fight scene is hilariously over-choreographed, dialogue swings wildly from epic to comically cheesy, and the romantic subplot borders on straight-up parody. Despite, or perhaps because of, its ridiculousness, Deathstalker became a cult favorite. Fans of sword and sorcery B-movies love it for its unapologetic embrace of excess, and for giving audiences exactly what they didn't know they wanted: over-the-top adventure, gratuitous nudity, and a hero whose charisma far outweighs any semblance of realism. If you're in the mood for a film where swords, spells, and camp collide in glorious fashion, Deathstalker is a must-watch, but don't expect subtlety. This movie is a prime example of 80s fantasy filmmaking running completely off the rails, and for fans of the genre, that's exactly the point. Deathstalker is the kind of wild ride that makes you laugh, cringe, and cheer all at once. 9. Deathstalker II, 1987. If you thought the original Deathstalker was wild, brace yourself for Deathstalker II, where sword and sorcery meets over-the-top camp in ways that will make your jaw drop. This sequel takes everything that worked, or didn't, in the first movie and cranks it up to absurdity. With an even cheesier script, bigger explosions, and a villain whose evilness is matched only by his glittery wardrobe, Deathstalker II feels like a fever dream of 80s excess. Our hero, Deathstalker, faces off against a mix of sorcerers, thieves, and lustful courtiers, but don't expect tight plotting. This movie thrives on ridiculous one-liners, gratuitous nudity, and battle scenes that look like a medieval cosplay gone wrong. Every scene seems determined to outdo the last in sheer absurdity, from magical duels that defy physics to over-the-top sword fights that go on just long enough for you to question reality. What makes Deathstalker II truly unforgettable and monetizable for us movie buffs is that it perfectly captures the late 80s exploitation vibe: R-rated mayhem, eye-popping costumes, and a tongue-in-cheek attitude that borders on parody. You'll laugh, you'll cringe, and you'll keep watching, hoping to see what insane twist comes next. For fans of Conan the Barbarian, this is like stepping into an alternate universe where the rules of storytelling take a back seat to sheer, chaotic fun. If you love 80s fantasy gone totally off the rails, Deathstalker II delivers it in spades, and for creators like us, that makes every shocking moment click-worthy, shareable, and perfect for audience retention. 8. Red Sonja, 1985. Red Sonja. The film that promised a sword and sorcery epic but delivered a roller coaster of chaos. Riding the wave of Conan mania, this 1985 flick tried to carve out its own niche with a fierce heroine at the helm, played by the unforgettable Brigitte Nielsen. Fans expected epic battles, dark magic, and thrilling adventure, but what they got was something far stranger. The plot revolves around Red Sonja seeking revenge against the evil Queen Gedrin, who murdered her family. Sounds classic fantasy, right? But the execution veered wildly off course. Over-the-top dialogue, campy one-liners, and questionable special effects made it feel less like a gripping sword and sorcery tale and more like a Saturday afternoon parody. Even the sword fights, meant to be the highlight, often looked awkwardly staged. Despite the chaos, there's a silver lining: Arnold Schwarzenegger's cameo as Lord Calidor, yes, the Conan himself, gave audiences a fleeting glimpse of the magic they'd hoped for, and honestly, it's the scene fans still talk about today. The movie became a cult favorite, not because it succeeded as a blockbuster, but because it was so gloriously unhinged. Every cheesy costume, awkward romance, and giant snake attack turned it into a guilty pleasure that 80s fantasy enthusiasts can't resist revisiting. In the end, Red Sonja is a prime example of an ambitious Conan-inspired film going off the rails in spectacular fashion, a cautionary tale of how even the mightiest sword-wielding heroes can't save a movie from its own campy ambitions. 7. Warrior and the Sorceress, 1984. If you thought the 80s were done with sword-swinging heroes, Warrior and the Sorceress came charging in to prove you wrong, and then promptly veered off the rails. Directed by the notorious John C. Broderick and starring David Carradine, This low-budget fantasy was basically a Conan the Barbarian knockoff on steroids. But here's the kicker. It didn't just borrow the muscle-bound hero template. It went full-on anything goes with nudity, cheesy monsters, and laughably over-the-top fight scenes. Set in a desert kingdom that looks suspiciously like a reused soundstage from a spaghetti western, Carradine plays a wandering warrior tasked with saving a beautiful sorceress from an evil warlord. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. Along the way, you get bizarrely edited action sequences, glaring continuity errors, and a storyline that makes less sense than a sword stuck in a stone. But somehow, that's exactly the charm. Audiences at the time were divided. Some laughed at the campy sword fights and outrageous costumes, while others were horrified at how gloriously tacky the film was. Today, it's a cult classic for fans of the absurd, the over-the-top, and the unapologetically R-rated fantasy mayhem. If you love movies that are so bad they're good, Warrior and the Sorceress is basically a treasure chest of 80s cinematic chaos. 6. The Barbarians, 1987. If you thought every sword and sorcery flick in the 80s had to take itself seriously, The Barbarians is here to prove you wrong, spectacularly wrong. This film, directed by Ruggero Deodato, who was better known for the shockfest Cannibal Holocaust, throws the classic Conan formula into a blender and hits chaos on full power. The story follows twin brothers, Korgo and Kutchek, raised in captivity by a cruel sorcerer after their village is massacred. The film promises revenge, heroics, and epic battles, but delivers a whirlwind of campy dialogue, questionable acting, and fights that look like backyard wrestling with swords. Think leather loincloths, gratuitous shirtless biceps, and a soundtrack that screams late-night cable adventure more than epic fantasy. What makes The Barbarians monetizable content gold is its bizarre charm. It's the kind of movie that prompts viewers to grab popcorn and laugh at every over-the-top moment. From absurdly villainous henchmen to overacted death scenes, this is pure cult fodder. You can literally monetize nostalgia, and audiences can't get enough of these so bad it's good sword and sorcery disasters. Despite its flaws, or maybe because of them, The Barbarians has earned a spot in the hearts of retro movie buffs and cult film collectors. It's campy, chaotic, and completely unapologetic, making it the perfect highlight in a countdown of Conan knockoffs that went off the rails. For viewers looking for laughs, ridiculous stunts, and late-night movie madness, this is a sword and sorcery gem that never tries to be anything more than outrageous fun. 5. Conquest, 1983. If you thought sword and sorcery films were all about heroic barbarians and epic battles, Conquest takes that formula and tosses it into a blender, then forgets to turn it on. This 1983 flick, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger's body double John Steiner as a vaguely heroic barbarian, tried to ride the coattails of Conan the Barbarian but ended up stumbling into pure chaos. From start to finish, the movie feels like a fever dream. A young barbarian teams up with a princess to fight evil warlords, but every set piece and battle scene is absurdly staged. One moment, there's a dramatic sword duel. The next, you're watching stuntmen flail in what looks like a high school gym. The dialogue is hilariously over the top, the costumes look like they were borrowed from a Renaissance fair, and the epic soundtrack sounds more like a bad synthesizer experiment than a heroic score. What makes Conquest truly unforgettable and monetizable for viewers hungry for ridiculous cinema is how unapologetically it goes off the rails. It's a movie that doesn't just fail to capture the magic of Conan. It celebrates its own chaos with every awkward stunt, every questionable acting choice, and every bizarre plot twist. It's perfect for fans of cult classics, R-rated 80s absurdity, and anyone who loves to witness a film try hard and spectacularly miss. The nudity and over-the-top violence made Conquest R-rated, so it attracted a certain adult audience back in the day, giving it a kind of taboo allure that's irresistible for retro film collectors today. 4. Hundra, 1983. If you thought the 80s were all about muscle-bound barbarians swinging swords, Hundra takes that concept and cranks it to an almost absurdly feminist extreme. Directed by Matt Cimber, this Italian fantasy cult gem stars Laureen Landon as the unstoppable warrior Hundra, a fierce Amazon raised in a tribe of women who swear off men entirely. When her village is attacked and destroyed by raiders, Hundra sets off on a vengeance-filled quest, carving her way through every villain in sight with style, strength, and a smirk. What makes Hundra unforgettable isn't just its over-the-top sword fights or the R-rated nudity and blood splashes, but the sheer audacity of its premise, a one-woman army challenging an entire patriarchal world. The film veers from intense battle sequences to bizarrely humorous moments, like her interactions with a reluctant love interest and comically villainous warlords, giving it that so ridiculous it's addictive vibe. Though it was marketed as a female Conan, Hundra went its own wild way, mixing the savage sword and sorcery tropes of the era with a unique feminist twist. It may not have made the blockbuster splash of Conan the Barbarian, but it carved out a cult following that still praises Laureen Landon's fearless performance today. For fans of outrageous 80s fantasy, over-the-top action, and R-rated madness, Hundra is a gem that proves sometimes going completely off the rails is exactly what makes a movie unforgettable. Fun fact, the film's budget was tiny, but the imagination was huge. Every fight scene, costume, and set-piece screams were here to shock and entertain. 3. Amazons, 1986. In the wake of the sword and sorcery craze, Amazons tried to ride the Conan wave but ended up in pure chaos. The film promised fierce warrior women, epic battles, and mythical kingdoms, but what it delivered was a bizarre mix of campy nudity, low-budget costumes, and fight choreography that looked more like a backyard wrestling match than a legendary saga. Set in a post-apocalyptic world ruled by women, the story follows Queen Talus, played with unrestrained gusto, as she defends her kingdom from a band of roving male mercenaries. Think less Conan the Barbarian, more, what happens when someone throws every fantasy cliché into a blender and forgets the lid? From glowing swords to improbable stunts, every scene screams, "We tried," sort of, while accidentally giving audiences the kind of absurd spectacle that cult movie fans live for. Despite, or perhaps because of, its chaotic energy, Amazons carved out a strange niche in the grindhouse and VHS rental circuits of the 1980s. Today, it's the perfect guilty pleasure for fans of over-the-top R-rated fantasy, proving that sometimes, going completely off the rails makes a movie unforgettable. Fun fact, some scenes were so poorly choreographed that stunt doubles and extras often improvised mid-shot, giving the film an unintended, so bad it's good, charm that collectors and retro fans can't resist. 2. Ator, 1982. Conan's lesser-known cousin that went off the rails. If you think Conan the Barbarian was the peak of 80s sword and sorcery, think again, because Ator, the fighting eagle, took the formula and ran it straight off a cliff in the most entertaining way possible. Starring Miles O'Keefe, who you might remember as a muscle-bound action hero, Ator is your typical muscle and magic fantasy hero. His mission? Rescue a kidnapped princess, defeat a nefarious sorcerer, and save the world, or at least part of it. The details? Honestly, they're a little fuzzy. The plot jumps around like it's lost a map to its own story. But that's part of Ator's charm. It's chaotic, over-the-top, and unintentionally hilarious. Let's talk about the fight scenes. Imagine sword clashes that look more like slow-motion dances than epic battles. Characters freeze mid-motion, stares last way too long, and enemies retreat at the most convenient times. And then there's the infamous magic ring that Ator wears, which seems to grant him powers, except the movie never really explains how. He lifts, he smashes, he saves people, sometimes all at once, sometimes by pure luck. And the dubbing, oh, the dubbing. Lines meant to be dramatic end up sounding absurd, giving you dialogue like, "I will crush your destiny with the power of my fists." You can't help but laugh. It's the kind of movie where every scene begs for a reaction video or a "so bad it's good" countdown clip. Despite its attempts at R-rated action, blood, scantily clad heroines, and mature themes, Ator accidentally veers into campy comedy, making it a cult classic for fans of B-movie fantasy. The movie even inspired future parodies and midnight screenings because it's so memorably ridiculous. Clips of Ator's awkward fight scenes, his over-the-top hero poses, and bizarre dialogue are pure gold for audience engagement. People will pause, rewatch, and share, adding commentary like, "What was he thinking here?" or "This villain is clearly allergic to logic," keeps viewers laughing and increases watch time, a perfect recipe for boosting ad revenue. In short, Ator proves that not every Conan knockoff needed to be epic. Sometimes, being gloriously absurd is enough to make history, or at least internet history. 1. Troll, 1986, when sword and sorcery met bizarre comedy horror. If you thought the 80s Conan-inspired sword and sorcery craze couldn't get any weirder, Troll proved you wrong in spectacular fashion. Released in 1986, this film promised a dark fantasy adventure but delivered something closer to a psychedelic fever dream. Following a young boy named Harry Potter. Okay, not the wizard you know, but yes, a boy named Harry Potter. He moves into an apartment building that is suddenly overrun by magical creatures. Enter the Troll, a tiny, mischievous monster who casts a spell over the building, turning residents into fantastical monsters. Suddenly, what was supposed to be a heroic fantasy tale becomes a chaotic mix of horror, camp, and unintentionally hilarious transformations. Sword fights? Sure, but mostly with broomsticks and curse tenants. What makes Troll fascinating and monetizable for your channel is its cult legacy. Despite, or maybe because of, its absurd plot, mismatched effects, and low-budget charm, it captured the hearts of late-night cable audiences. Modern viewers watch it for the wild costumes, over-the-top acting, and the sheer audacity of its Conan-style fantasy world that doesn't take itself seriously. For collectors and nostalgia lovers, Troll is a goldmine. It's the perfect example of an R-rated fantasy knockoff that aimed for epic heroics but ended up somewhere between Labyrinth and a bad acid trip. And yes, it even spawned a sequel, Troll 2, which is infamous for being even more bonkers. Fun fact for your monetization hook, highlighting obscure R-rated 80s fantasy films like Troll taps into high-engagement retro content searches, nostalgia clicks, and cult horror/fantasy collectors. Perfect for targeting audiences in the USA, Canada, and Europe who love, so bad it's good, cinema. And that wraps up our wild journey through 10 R-rated 80s Conan knockoffs that went completely off the rails. From over-the-top sword fights to magical mayhem, these films proved that in the 80s, fantasy could go absolutely bonkers, and we loved every outrageous moment. If you haven't subscribed to Globewise Entertainment yet, hit that subscribe button now so you never miss our deep dives into Hollywood's craziest, most unforgettable movies. And we want to hear from you. Tell us in the comment box which of these over-the-top Conan knockoffs is your favorite. Who knows, your pick might just inspire our next video.